All right, now we're dealing with the Sermon on the Mount. This is week 6, and the passage for this week is Matthew 5:43 through chapter 6, verse 4. So it's a briefer passage than normal, but it's a very important passage as well. What we're going to do first is look at the assignments very briefly. There is no group work this week, so we will do. Just look at the individual assignment. I want to remind you that you have two primary assignments. The first is translation of the passage, and that is due on Wednesday night, and then by midnight. And then on Saturday, you have the exegesis, phrasing, and sermon outline for the same passage. What I would encourage you to do is remember two things specifically. One is that you want to take a look very at the beginning and as often as you need to at the grading rubric, both on the translation and on the exegesis, phrasing, and sermon outline. And so to make sure you follow that. And the other thing is to follow the PowerPoint that is in course documents, because that'll give you specific instructions for what you'll be doing in the assignment this week. So I think that will cover the assignment part of it. So what we want to do now is to take a look at the passage itself. And again, as I say, it is a briefer passage, but I just want to remind you that all of these passages in the Sermon on the Mount are extremely important. Just to go back and review a little bit on what we've seen, Jesus started out with the Beatitudes, the characteristics of kingdom citizens. He moved from that to talk about some specific things like the law. How does all of this apply? And now he comes to a section in this sermon where he is giving his agenda, where he is talking about what his expectation is for kingdom citizens, how kingdom citizens are to live, who they are to be, and as a result of who they are, how they're to live. And so he's going to give us a number of examples here that will be important for us. It's not a question of how good can I be, but rather it is how much of Jesus do others see in me. When he speaks of the characteristics of kingdom citizens here, the focus that he has is on the characteristics of himself that he expects others to see in us. when Jesus told us what kingdom citizens are to be, what he was trying to say is that we need to be revealing him in the context of our culture, revealing his character, his characteristics in our lives should be so obvious. When he dealt with the doing of the law, he focused on his character as it is revealed in kingdom citizens, the changed attitudes that we have as a result of our relationship with him, and the surpassing righteousness that he works in us as a result of that. So in the rest of the sermon now, he's going to speak on how kingdom citizens practice that surpassing righteousness. The passage we're going to look at first in chapter 5, verses 43 through 48 is really a summary. We dealt with it a little bit in the last video, but I want to do it again just briefly here. But what he is doing is reminding us what that primary characteristic is, because all that we do as we reveal his character, in all that we do, we reveal him as one who loves us. This is that preeminent characteristic that he has. He loves us, and that's what he wants us to reveal. He wants us, as we reveal his love in our lives, to also demonstrate that characteristic in the lives of others as we live in our culture. So he says in verse 43, you've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That's the way it used to be. Now it's different, as he is pointing out here. Now, what he wants us to understand is that we love our enemies, that we bless those who persecute us, that we make a difference in their lives because our action toward other people is not based on who they are. It's not a reaction to who they are, but it's an action that comes out of who we are on the inside because of the transformation that has taken place in our lives. And so that's what he wants us to do. Now he says, you do this so that you may be sons of God. That's what that's the important thing here. He makes that clear in verse 45, so that you may be the sons of your Father who is in heaven. When you show the characteristics of the Father, when you show other people that you are sons of the Father, you are showing them the characteristics, because that's what sons do. They demonstrate the characteristics of the Father. And that's what he wants us to do in this situation. He also goes on to explain that characteristic of the Father, that he loves all people. He loves even those who do not respond in faith to him, those who are not kind to him. He loves those who speak ill of him. He sends rain on the just and the unjust, is the way he says it here in the sermon, and that's what he is trying to communicate toward us. Because he says, if you only love your friends and not your enemies, what have you done other than a normal person who does not have that relationship with God can do? So we show that there is something abnormal, supernatural about our lives because we show the characteristics that he demonstrates because of his great love for us. So that's what we are to do. And then he brings it all to a summary in verse 48, in another one of these verses that makes us nervous, because what he's trying to help us understand is that we are to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. You know what this means? It means exactly what it says. And we try to find ways to justify it and get around it, but that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to have that standard. That's his standard. His standard is perfection. It could be no less because of who he is. And he wants us to be like him. And that's the reason that standard is there. Then as he moves into chapter 6, he raises a warning. He says, be aware or beware. That means to be aware, to have it out in front of you so you can see it and look at it. Do not practice your righteousness before men for the purpose of being seen. Because I think it's clear what he's saying. I think we can understand this very clearly because it's very straightforward. Our motivation should not be to get the praise of those people who live around us, because that's not what's important. What is important is that we live before the Father in such a way that we would be accepted by him and confirmed and affirmed by him. The point that Jesus makes throughout this section is, if you're looking for a reward from man, from the praise of man, you can get that. It's not difficult to do that. If you just act in such a way that it pleases man, then they're going to give you that reward. But that's it. That's all it is. It's a temporary thing. You simply get that fickle praise from man. But if you want the real reward that comes from the Father, then we must live to please him because of the transformation that's taken place in our lives. Now understand what a reward is. That the reward is not something that we get for our benefit, but it is the joy of knowing that we have been obedient to him, and that we have done what he wants us to do that. So the thing he's trying to help us to understand is how we get from attitude to practice. He's transformed our attitudes. Now, how do we practice? Your actions come from the attitudes of your heart. What you are, and that's what you do. You do what you are. How do we get from being to doing then? How do we get from building our own kingdoms to participating in the building of his kingdom? How do we get from seeking to control his kingdom to being controlled by him and directed by him? How do we get from trying to do good to improve ourselves to falling in faith on him and living in such a relationship that we understand the practice of righteousness in us is his work in us, not something that we do on our own. So the first example, and that's what we're looking at here, it's in verses 1-4, is the doing of alms or doing of good things, giving, sharing with other people. Notice what he says about man. Man does this he likes to sound a trumpet to draw attention to himself. That's what that metaphor means. He does it in the synagogues. He does it on the street corners. And all of this calls attention to ourselves and to the act that we're performing. This attention-getting act calls for the honor of men. And in reality, it gets the honor of men because people are impressed by that. They look at that and they see that and they brag on us. But that's not our goal. Remember, we do our good works, as he said in the beginning, so that men may see our good works and glorify our Father who is in heaven. And that's what all of this is about. So the focus is on God and the focus is on others rather than on ourselves. The honor goes to God for whom we give when we give to others. So we don't want to draw attention to ourselves. First, we'll get a reward now, and we will get noticed. That's what the reward is, getting noticed. But it is much better to be obedient to him and to fulfill his purpose. The joy of obedience is the reward that he gives to us there. So what we need to do is not be like the hypocrites, but rather we need to be like kingdom citizens who live in the same way he lives, so that we're not drawing attention to ourselves, so that the attention will go to him and the glory will go to him, because that's what our task is all about.